I want to get back to the release of the Congressional Pig Book on government waste. It came out this morning. Look who's here, the man who started the Pig Book, former Oklahoma Senator Tom Coburn. Welcome back, sir.
Welcome. You just talked about workforce development.
Yeah.
You know, they had 47 job training programs in government, spent $14.3 billion a year on them. And all the studies showed is they were great at hiring people to train people to work, but they couldn't hire anybody to give them a life skill.
That was back in your days.
Well, that was in 2014. And so I talked them into reforming it. The reform was, is we now have 45 programs, and it still doesn't accomplish anything. And now you have the White House talking about job training, when in fact we're wasting $12 billion a year on it right now.
But isn't that the nature of government? Politicians spend money, sometimes wastefully, but in order to buy votes, and that will never, ever change.
Well, it's different. It's in order to get campaign funds, because all the people that run these job training programs are big contributors to the people that want to keep them going, even though they don't accomplish anything on good statistical looks. So it's not about buying votes, it's about getting campaign money. And you know, how do you please the lobbyists who are getting after you so you continue with job training programs that don't work? And now we're going to talk and start more?
But my point is, it's always been that way, and it always will be that way.
No, it hasn't. Stuart, it has not always been that way. When they changed in 1995, where chairmen of committees had to raise X amount of money, and chairmen of subcommittees had to raise to keep their positions, that's when it all changed.
Whose rule was that?
That was Newt Gingrich's rule.
And that was for Republicans and Democrats?
Well, that was just Republicans. The Democrats were already doing it because they had no term limits, so the chairman had to raise money to keep their position. So, you know, what we've done is bastardized our own democracy through money. That's why term limits are such a lot of people don't agree with it, but 84% of Americans do, that if in fact you had term limits, you'd stop all this foolishness. And then people would be concentrated on what's good for the country, not what's good for their political career.
Trouble is it constitutional to do
Yes,
that?
It is.
Is it?
We had it in 25 states until the Supreme Court said the states couldn't limit their terms. And so you have to have a constitutional amendment to get this, since the Supreme Court ruled erroneously that we couldn't decide that we wanted to limit our senators or members' term. But if you have a constitutional amendment, absolutely.
I'm just going to bring to your attention a couple of what some people call wasteful spending. And I want your comment on it, because I don't see this necessarily as wasteful spending. On your screen now, brown tree snake eradication program, $663,000. Now, that's for Guam, the island in the Pacific, which is overrun with brown snakes. I mean, to an horrific degree. I don't call that wasteful spending, Mr. Senator Coburn.
Well, it depends. Who is responsible for snake elimination? Are the states or the territories, or is it the federal government? If you read the enumerated powers, that's not in the enumerated powers. Guam's responsible for getting rid of brown snakes. Now, if they don't have the money, then the federal government ought to help them. But, you know, all we've done is say you don't have to make hard choices in Guam, and we'll give you $663,000. So the question goes back, is what does our Constitution actually say? It says everything that's listed here is the federal government's responsibility, but everything that's not listed is reserved explicitly to the people in the states. And we have a federal government that's totally ignored that. And so now, why do we have $1.2 trillion deficits? Because we're doing things the federal government was never intended to do, like all this pork that's coming out.
One more for you. $13 million to Save America's Treasures grants program is intended to help preserve historic locations across the country. Now, some would call that wasteful. I don't. What say you?
Well, I think it depends who decides what's America's treasure.
Good point. Yeah.
All right. So no, it's an unelected bureaucrat somewhere telling the state you have to do this. And what's wrong with the sovereignty and the federalism concept that the state ought to decide what's of value in their state?
Senator, how well has term limits worked in the states that have them? They always cite California. We have term limits, but politically it's more dysfunctional than ever before.
Well, I think, well, number one, it depends on what the term limits are, the amount of time. It also determines what the political fundraising is surrounding it. You know, I think the best term limits are self-imposed term limits. They gave me a very limited, it put me limits on what I was going to do and how I was going to do it. It also gave me a vision. Here's how much time you have to do this. So I think it's, I think it will work. The question is who decides? Who gets to decide these major questions? Is it some unelected bureaucrat in Washington, or is it a state legislator who can actually be lobbied and talked to by the people that are going to be impacted by the decision?
Well, that's the way it should be, but that's not the way it is.
Well, it's not that way because we've wandered far and away from the enumerated powers.
Senator Tom Coburn, Oklahoma, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We hope you're well.
I am. Thank you.
That's good news indeed. Thank you, sir.
Good to see you all.
The question facing us and facing our fellow countrymen is a two-word question. Very simply, who decides? The American founders had a simple answer. We, the people, decide.